In the golden light of dawn, two officers on routine patrol encounter something that defies explanation. A tiny bobcat kitten emerges from the wilderness, not fleeing from them, but deliberately seeking them out. With amber eyes reflecting a desperate intelligence, the young bobcat somehow understood its only hope lay in the hands of strangers. It leads Officers James Carter and Emily Brooks deep into the Arizona forest, maintaining a careful distance, glancing back as if to ensure they're still following. The kitten's behavior spoke of something deeper, more urgent, a desperate mission that would challenge everything these seasoned officers knew about the divide between wild and human worlds. What could drive a predator to seek help from humans, its natural enemy? As the officers venture further from the trail, they discover a truth more extraordinary than they could have imagined. This is the story of a choice that bridged two worlds, and a rescue that would leave wildlife experts questioning everything they thought they knew about the boundaries between humans and wild animals. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The azure sky was just beginning to flush with the first strokes of dawn when Officer James Carter started his patrol along the eastern perimeter of Flagstaff, Arizona. At 56, James had spent over 3 decades with the Flagstaff Police Department, and while retirement paperwork sat half-completed on his desk at home, something kept him from signing the final line. The quiet morning patrols through the outskirts of town, where civilization gently gave way to wilderness, were his favorite part of the job. "Another glorious morning in the high desert," James remarked to his partner, Officer Emily Brooks, a 32-year-old transfer from Phoenix who'd been partnered with him for just under a year. Emily had requested the transfer after burnout from the intensity of Metro police work, finding solace in the slower rhythm of Flagstaff and the mentorship of the seasoned officer everyone called Old Carter. "You say that every morning," Emily replied with a smile, sipping her coffee as their patrol SUV rumbled slowly along the dirt service road that skirted Oak Ridge Trail. The ponderosa pines stood like sentinels against the brightening sky, their scent, reminiscent of vanilla and caramel, wafting through the open windows. "Because every morning here is glorious," James countered, easing the vehicle to a stop beside a trailhead marker. "Let's walk a bit. My arthritis is acting up and Doc Miller says I need to keep moving." Emily nodded, securing her utility belt as they stepped out into the crisp morning air. At an elevation of nearly 7,000 feet, Flagstaff mornings carried a chill even in late spring, and today was no exception. They began a slow patrol along the trail, a routine inspection to ensure no overnight campers had violated regulations or left smoldering fire pits behind. The partners walked in companionable silence, the crunch of pine needles beneath their boots and the occasional call of a Steller's jay the only sounds accompanying them. 20 minutes into their walk, Emily paused, her head cocked slightly. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, hand instinctively moving toward her holster. James stopped, his weathered face creasing in concentration as he listened. There it was, a soft rustling in the underbrush to their right, too rhythmic to be the wind. His years of experience had taught him to recognize the movement patterns of local wildlife, and this was neither the cautious stealth of a mountain lion nor the deliberate stride of a deer. "Stay alert," he murmured, turning slowly toward the sound. The brushy manzanita parted, and both officers froze in surprise. A small bobcat kitten, no larger than a domestic cat but unmistakable with its tufted ears and distinctive facial markings, emerged onto the trail. Its tawny coat was dusty, its sides heaving slightly as though it had been running. "Well, I'll be damned," James breathed, immediately dropping to one knee despite the protest of his joints. In his 30 years of service, He'd encountered plenty of wildlife. Bears rummaging through trash bins, coyotes slinking through neighborhoods, even the occasional mountain lion crossing. But he'd never seen a young bobcat approach humans so deliberately. The kitten stood motionless, amber eyes locked on the officers. It was clearly underweight, its ribs visible beneath the spotted coat. But what struck James most was its demeanor. There was none of the typical fear or aggression he'd expect from a wild predator. Instead, the creature seemed to exude a desperate sort of intentionality. "Poor thing's starving," Emily observed quietly, her initial caution giving way to concern. "Should we call Arizona Game and fish?" James raised a hand, signaling her to wait. "Look at its behavior. It's not acting right for a wild bobcat." As if to confirm his assessment, the kitten took 2 tentative steps forward, then stopped again, its gaze unwavering. "It almost seems like it's waiting for us," Emily said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Before James could respond, the kitten turned and trotted a few yards back into the brush, then paused, looking over its shoulder directly at the officers. "I think it wants us to follow," James said, slowly rising to his feet. His rational mind told him this was unusual, potentially dangerous behavior, but something deeper. The instinct that had guided him through countless situations over his long career urged him forward. "Carter, we can't just follow a wild animal into the brush," Emily protested, though her voice lacked conviction. She too sensed something extraordinary was happening. "Just a little way," James assured her, already picking his way carefully toward where the kitten waited. "Keep your distance and stay alert." The kitten, seeming to understand it had their attention, continued forward, maintaining a steady distance of about 10 yards between itself and the officers. It moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back as if to ensure its human followers hadn't lost interest. "This is the strangest thing I've seen in my 20 years on the force," Emily murmured as they left the established trail, following the bobcat kitten deeper into the juniper and pine forest that carpeted the slopes below Oak Ridge. James simply nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. Was the kitten orphaned? Separated from its mother? Domesticated and abandoned? None of these scenarios fully explained its behavior. After approximately half a mile of careful navigation through increasingly dense vegetation, the terrain began to slope downward. The kitten led them into a small ravine where a seasonal creek had carved a shallow channel into the earth. The banks were lined with thick juniper and manzanita, creating natural cover. The kitten paused at the edge of a particularly dense thicket, looking back once more before slipping inside. James and Emily exchanged glances, a wordless communication born of their partnership. With a slight nod, James carefully parted the branches to peer inside. What he saw made his breath catch. Nestled in a natural depression beneath the protective canopy of intertwined branches lay a much larger bobcat, clearly the kitten's mother. Even to his untrained eye, James could see she was in distress. Her sides heaved with labored breathing, and a dark stain matted the fur on her hind leg. Most alarming was the distension of her abdomen. The female was heavily pregnant and, from the looks of her condition, not far from delivery. "Emily," he whispered, gesturing for his partner to look. "She's injured and about to give birth from the looks of it." Emily's eyes widened as she took in the scene. The kitten brought us to her. It actually brought us to help its mother. The adult bobcat's eyes, glassy with pain or fever, locked onto the humans. Unlike her offspring, she responded with a warning growl, though it was weak and lacked the energy of a healthy predator. The kitten, apparently unconcerned by its mother's reaction, slipped past the brambles to curl up against her side. James pulled back, allowing the branches to close again. He motioned Emily away from the thicket, and they retreated several yards to confer. "We need to call this in," he said, already reaching for his radio. "Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation should handle this, but that mother cat needs immediate attention." Emily nodded, reaching for her phone. "I've got Sarah Martinez's number. She's the wildlife vet who handled that injured golden eagle last winter. I'll call her directly while you radio dispatch." While Emily made her call, James radioed the situation to dispatch. Within minutes, they had confirmation that a wildlife response team was being assembled, but the closest qualified handlers were at least 2 hours away in Phoenix. Sarah Martinez answered on the third ring, her voice clear despite the early hour. As Emily explained the situation, Sarah's professional demeanor remained steady, though her interest was clearly piqued by the unusual circumstances. An injured, pregnant bobcat with a kitten that deliberately brought humans to help? That's unprecedented, Sarah said. "I can be there in 40 minutes. Until then, here's what you need to do." Following Sarah's instructions, James and Emily established a perimeter around the thicket, marking it with caution tape from their vehicle to prevent hikers or other officers from disturbing the scene. They retrieved an emergency wildlife kit from their patrol SUV, something standard in rural Arizona police vehicles, which contained water, simple first aid supplies, and high-protein food that could be left for injured wildlife until professionals arrived. "The key is to minimize stress," James repeated Sarah's advice as they prepared a small offering of food and water. "We leave these just within sight of the den, then back away. No loud noises, no sudden movements." Emily nodded, carefully arranging a shallow dish of water and some of the protein-rich food pellets at the edge of the thicket. They retreated to a distance of about 30 yards, finding a fallen log where they could maintain visual contact with the thicket entrance without imposing their presence too strongly. "Do you think the mother will survive?" Emily asked quietly, her voice betraying emotional investment that went beyond professional duty. James considered the question thoughtfully. "Hard to say. Wild animals are remarkably resilient, but she's fighting multiple battles. The injury, the pregnancy, malnutrition from being unable to hunt effectively." He trailed off, not wanting to voice the worst possibilities. "But that kitten," he continued after a moment, his weathered face softening with wonder. "That kitten knew to seek help. That's not standard wildlife behavior, Emily. That's something special." They fell silent, watching as the bobcat kitten cautiously emerged from the thicket. It sniffed at the offered food, then began to eat hungrily. After satisfying its immediate hunger, the kitten picked up one of the food pellets in its mouth and disappeared back into the den. "It's taking food to its mother," Emily observed, a catch in her voice. James nodded, emotion tightening his throat. In his 3 decades of law enforcement, most of his encounters with humanity had hardened him. But moments like this, glimpses of something pure and uncalculated, still had the power to move him deeply. Sarah Martinez arrived 45 minutes later, stepping out of her weathered Jeep in well-worn field clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. At 38, she had established herself as one of Arizona's most respected wildlife veterinarians, specializing in predator rehabilitation. She greeted the officers with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to emergency response. "Show me," she said simply, shouldering a comprehensive medical kit. As they approached the thicket, Sarah slowed her pace, her trained eye assessing the situation. "The kitten is acting as sentinel," she observed, nodding toward where the young bobcat had positioned itself at the den entrance. That's normal protective behavior. What's not normal is it seeking human help. She knelt several yards from the thicket, removing a pair of binoculars from her kit to observe from a distance. The mother's position suggests defensive posturing, but she's not actively aggressive. That's concerning. Healthy bobcats would be much more reactive to human presence. She lowered the binoculars with a frown. She's in worse shape than I hoped. "What's the plan?" James asked, deferring to her expertise. Sarah's response was measured. Ideally, we'd wait for the full response team with proper tranquilizing equipment. But given her condition and the imminent birth, I don't think we have that luxury. She began unpacking items from her kit: a specialized blow dart gun, syringes filled with carefully measured sedatives, protective gloves, and various medical supplies. I'll need to sedate her, just enough to examine the wound and administer emergency treatment. Too much sedation could harm the unborn cubs or trigger premature labor. She glanced up at the officers. "This is going to be delicate. I need one of you to help me and one to secure the kitten." James and Emily exchanged glances. "I'll assist with the mother," James volunteered. Despite his age, he had steady hands and decades of experience remaining calm under pressure. "I'll handle the kitten," Emily confirmed, already pulling on the protective gloves Sarah offered. Sarah nodded, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. "When I give the signal, Emily will need to distract the kitten with food while James and I approach the mother. Move slowly, speak softly, and follow my lead precisely. We get one chance to do this right." The trio prepared methodically, reviewing their approach several times before finally implementing their plan. Emily successfully lured the kitten a short distance from the den entrance with food, while Sarah, with James close behind, approached the thicket with the tranquilizer gun ready. The mother bobcat's growl deepened as they drew near, but her weakened state prevented her from mounting an effective defense. With practiced precision, Sarah delivered a minimal sedative dose. Within minutes, the bobcat's eyes grew heavy, though she remained semi-conscious, exactly as Sarah had intended. "Now comes the tricky part," Sarah murmured, donning additional protective gear before carefully parting the branches to access the den. What followed was an intense 30 minutes of careful medical intervention. Sarah confirmed an infected puncture wound on the bobcat's hind leg, likely from a territorial fight with another predator, or perhaps a defensive injury from prey. She cleaned the wound, administered antibiotics and fluids, and performed a quick field assessment of the pregnancy. 3 cubs, maybe 4, she reported, her fingers gently palpating the sedated animal's abdomen. "And active. That's a good sign." She applied a lightweight bandage to the wound and gave a final injection. "That's all we can do for now. The rest is up to her." They carefully withdrew, allowing the mother bobcat space as the light sedative began to wear off. The kitten, having evaded Emily's attempts at containment, darted back to its mother as soon as the humans retreated. "What now?" James asked, watching the reunion with a mixture of concern and hope. Sarah packed her equipment with practiced efficiency. "Now we wait. The full response team will be here within the hour. They'll set up remote monitoring so we can observe without disturbing the family. If the mother's condition deteriorates or labor begins prematurely, we'll intervene. Otherwise, the less human interaction, the better." "And if she delivers successfully?" Emily asked. "Then we assess. Ideally, we let nature take its course. A wild bobcat family belongs in the wild. But given her injury and the unusual circumstances..." Sarah shrugged. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it." The wildlife response team arrived shortly thereafter. 2 handlers from the Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and a field biologist from Northern Arizona University. They quickly established a perimeter and set up cameras that would allow them to monitor the den remotely. With the immediate crisis addressed, James and Emily were free to return to their regular patrol duties, though both found it difficult to focus on routine matters after their extraordinary morning. "She'll keep us updated, right?" Emily confirmed as they reluctantly departed the scene, leaving behind their contact information with the wildlife team. "Sarah's good people," James assured her. "She knows we're invested." The next 48 hours passed with agonizing slowness for both officers. They received periodic updates from Sarah. The mother Bobcat was holding her own. The antibiotics seemed to be working. Her fever had broken, but no cubs had yet arrived. On the 3rd morning, James's cell phone rang at 5:14 a.m. He answered it with the immediate alertness of a career law enforcement officer. "Carter," he said, already reaching for his uniform pants even before he heard Sarah's excited voice. "She's in labor," Sarah reported without preamble. "2 cubs delivered so far, both appear healthy. 3rd is on the way. You and Brooks might want to come up if you can." James didn't need to be told twice. He called Emily, who answered on the first ring as though she'd been waiting by her phone. "I'll pick you up in 10, he said simply. When they arrived at the monitored site, the sun was just beginning to illuminate the eastern sky. The wildlife team had established a small field station a respectable distance from the den, where equipment displayed live feeds from the cameras they'd carefully positioned. Sarah greeted them with an uncharacteristic grin, the exhaustion in her eyes offset by evident satisfaction. "3 healthy cubs," she reported, "all delivered without complication. Mother is tired but alert and attentive." James and Emily crowded around the monitor where grainy night vision footage showed the Bobcat family. The mother lay on her side, 3 tiny, blind newborns nestled against her. The older kitten, the one that had led them to the den, sat in a protective posture nearby, occasionally leaning in to sniff its new siblings. "That's remarkable," Emily breathed, watching the scene with undisguised wonder. "The most remarkable part is still the kitten's behavior," Sarah said, gesturing to the older offspring. "We've been discussing it with the university researchers. The leading theory is that it was partially socialized to humans somehow. Perhaps brief exposure to humans when even younger, or possibly even a hybrid with domestic cat genes, though that's extremely rare in the wild." "Whatever the reason," the field biologist added, joining their conversation, "its decision to seek human assistance likely saved not just its mother's life, but the lives of those 3 cubs as well. Without intervention, the infection would have continued to spread, and in her weakened state." He let the implications hang unspoken. "What happens to them now?" James asked, the question that had been foremost in his mind since they'd first discovered the injured mother. Sarah exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering. "That's what we've been debating. The mother's recovering well, but she'll need continued medical care for at least a few weeks. The cubs are newborn and completely dependent. And then there's the unusual behavior of the older kitten to consider." She led them to a folding table where maps and documents were spread out. "The consensus is that we need to relocate the family to a sanctuary setting, at least temporarily. There's a licensed wildlife rehabilitation center in the Coconino National Forest that specializes in native predator species. They have the expertise and facilities to care for the mother while she heals and monitor the development of both the older kitten and the newborns." "And long-term?" Emily pressed. "Will they be released back into the wild?" The biologist took over, pointing to several marked areas on a topographical map. The mother and the cubs, yes. Once the cubs are mature enough and the mother is fully recovered. We've identified several suitable release areas away from human habitation, but with appropriate prey density. And the kitten? James asked, somehow already knowing the answer. Sarah's expression softened. That's more complicated. Its unusual socialization makes it a poor candidate for wild release. It doesn't show appropriate caution around humans, which makes it vulnerable to those who might not have its best interests at heart. So it stays in captivity. The thought struck James as profoundly sad, despite the necessity. In a sanctuary environment, Sarah corrected gently, with enrichment, space, and caretakers who understand its needs. The sanctuary we're considering has been very successful rehabilitating animals with similar challenges. It won't be a cage, it'll be a home. James nodded, processing this information as he watched the monitor where the Bobcat family rested. The mother's eyes were closed now, her breathing even, while the 3 newborns nursed contentedly. The older kitten had settled against its mother's back, amber eyes half closed but vigilant. It did the right thing, seeking help, Emily said softly, standing beside him. Even if it means it can't go back to a fully wild life. It chose, James replied simply. Something about that choice resonated deeply with him. The intuitive leap beyond instinct, the risk taken in approaching creatures that should have been feared. It spoke to something he'd always believed but rarely articulated, that there existed a deeper intelligence in the natural world than humans typically credited. Over the next 2 weeks, James and Emily made regular visits to the wildlife response site, watching as the mother bobcat regained strength and the newborn cubs grew from helpless blind bundles to more active, aware creatures. The older kitten, which Sarah had indeed named Oakley after the trail where they'd first encountered it, continued to display its unusual blend of wild instinct and comfort around the human caretakers. The day finally came for the Bobcat family to be transported to the sanctuary. A specialized wildlife transport vehicle arrived early in the morning, equipped with secure, stress-minimizing enclosures. With practiced efficiency, the wildlife team sedated the mother and carefully loaded her and her cubs into the transport carrier. Oakley, however, proved more challenging. The kitten evaded initial attempts at controlled capture, darting around the perimeter of the site with surprising agility for its young age. It was James who finally coaxed it into the separate transport container, sitting quietly nearby with an offering of the food it had come to associate with humans. As the kitten cautiously approached, James spoke softly to it. "You did good, little one," he murmured. "You saved your family. Now we're going to keep you safe." Whether responding to his tone or simply making another choice, Oakley entered the transport container voluntarily, allowing James to secure the door without struggle. As the wildlife team prepared for departure, Sarah approached the officers. "We've arranged clearance for you to visit them at the sanctuary if you'd like. Special permission, not usually granted to non-staff." Emily's face lit up. "Really? That would be wonderful." James nodded his agreement, surprised by how emotionally invested he'd become in the fate of these wild creatures. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, James and Emily made the drive to the sanctuary nestled in the highlands of the Coconino National Forest. They were greeted by the sanctuary director, who led them to a spacious natural enclosure at the far edge of the property. The mother, we've been calling her Sierra, has made a complete recovery, the director explained as they walked. The cubs are thriving, already showing hunting instincts when we provide enrichment activities. "And Oakley?" James asked. The director smiled. "That's the most interesting part. Follow me." They were led to an observation platform that overlooked a carefully designed habitat. Several acres of natural Arizona landscape enclosed by specialized fencing. Within the space, they could see the mother bobcat sunning herself on a rock ledge, the 3 growing cubs practicing pouncing techniques in the grass nearby. Oakley, now substantially larger than when they'd first encountered it but still not fully grown, was positioned at the edge of a small clearing where a sanctuary staff member was conducting what appeared to be a training session. "We discovered Oakley has an extraordinary capacity for cooperation with humans," the director explained. "Our wildlife behaviorist has been working with it daily, and the results have been remarkable." They watched as Oakley responded to subtle hand signals from the trainer, moving to specific locations within the habitat and even retrieving items when directed. The kitten's behavior was neither fully wild nor domestic, something unique that straddled the boundary between worlds. "We're developing a special role for Oakley," the director continued. "A kind of ambassador program. Under carefully controlled conditions, it will help educate visitors about bobcat conservation and the broader importance of protecting predator species. Its unusual affinity for humans makes it uniquely suited for this work." James watched the scene with a lump in his throat. So, its choice, seeking human help that day, led to a purpose. A vital one, the director confirmed. Predator species face significant challenges from habitat loss and misconceptions about their nature. Having an ambassador like Oakley, an animal that demonstrates the intelligence and adaptability of its species, helps people connect to conservation in ways that statistics and lectures never could. As if aware it was being discussed, Oakley paused in its training session and looked directly toward the observation platform. Those same amber eyes that had locked onto James that fateful morning seemed to find him again, across the distance. "I think it remembers you," Emily said softly. "Maybe," James replied, though he suspected what the kitten recognized was not him specifically, but rather something it had sensed that first day, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between wild and human worlds. Later, as they prepared to leave the sanctuary, James found himself lingering, watching the bobcat family from a distance. The mother and 3 cubs had retreated to a sheltered den area for their midday rest, while Oakley had positioned itself on a high rock, surveying its territory with alert interest. Emily joined him, following his gaze. "Penny for your thoughts, old Carter?" James smiled at the nickname, no longer minding it as he once had. "Just thinking about retirement," he said. "That paperwork's still sitting on my desk at home." "And?" Emily prompted. He gestured toward the sanctuary grounds. "And I'm thinking maybe instead of signing it, I might look into volunteer opportunities here. They mentioned they need people with law enforcement background to help with their anti-poaching initiatives." Emily's expression brightened. "That's perfect, James. Though I'd miss having you as a partner." "Well," he said, his weathered face crinkling into a smile, "someone has to show the rookies how it's done. You've still got time to serve before you start thinking about second careers." As they walked back to their vehicle, James cast one final glance over his shoulder. Oakley remained perched on its lookout rock, silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Neither fully wild nor tame, but something new and necessary. A bridge between worlds that too often existed in opposition. In the bobcat's choice to trust, James had found renewal of his own purpose. Some might call it coincidence that their paths had crossed that spring morning, but James preferred to see it as something more meaningful, a reminder that compassion crossed species boundaries and that sometimes the most profound connections came from unexpected quarters. The story of the baby bobcat who sought help for its mother quickly spread beyond Flagstaff, featured in local news before being picked up by national wildlife publications and social media. Visitors to the sanctuary frequently requested to see the bobcat that knew to ask for help, making Oakley one of the facility's most effective ambassadors for wildlife conservation. For James and Emily, however, the true significance lay not in the publicity, but in the quiet moments. Their monthly visits to the sanctuary, watching the bobcat family thrive, and the profound reminder that in a world often defined by divisions, bridges could still be built through simple acts of trust and compassion.